Welcome to the show, everyone. My name is Julianne Meyer, and you are watching Own Your Wellness. And I am excited because today's guest, his favorite topic is one of my favorite topics, food, food, food. So without further ado, let me introduce Jack Bobo. Welcome.
Hi, so excited to be here. Thanks for
I'm
having me.
excited to have you. I have been looking forward to this conversation for a while now, and I've been looking you up, and you have so much information and so much, it's almost a little scary, but in a good way, because, how far down the rabbit hole do you want to go?
The further, the better, as far as I'm concerned.
Exactly. It's all about wellness, right? So
Yep.
if you wouldn't mind telling the audience a bit about yourself and your own wellness journey.
Yeah. So, I grew up not on a farm, but we had the fields came up to the back of our yard. So it sort of grew up near agriculture, but not sort of immersed in agriculture. And my family, though, we had a garden and it was like half the size of a football field. And, we were producing tomatoes and watermelons and corn and all sorts of things. And I didn't realize until later that that was agriculture. Like we were smallholder agriculture and it was all organic because my parents had child labor, which was me and my brothers. And, growing up that close to food, and then later sort of moving away from it and being in a place where, most people, they've never even been on a farm. And so I had this, interesting growing up, not understanding that I was immersed in it. And then later on, realizing that I had actually come from, that aspect. And so I had always wanted to work in the environment field. And eventually I made my way to the State Department, but I worked on agriculture. And it wasn't until I worked on agriculture that I realized that it has the biggest impact on the planet in terms of land and water and, climate and all of these things. And I sort of found my home. And so for me, it was less about, the eating aspect of it than understanding the broader aspect of food and agriculture's impact on really the entire planet. That's been my personal journey.
I think that that's pretty amazing too, especially since you were able to have such an early introduction to healthy food. I've noticed a lot of people that come on the show, it's after they found their way, after trying everything else besides healthy food. So
I found my way home in many ways. Yeah.
I love that. So could you explain a little bit about what it is that you're doing these days?
Yeah, so my day job is sort of the CEO of a company called Futurity. It's a food foresight company. I work with food tech startups and big food brands, helping them understand what does the future of food look like, where are consumer trends and attitudes going, and how do organizations get ahead of trends so they're not going to run over by them. But in many ways, my passion is very close to the topic of your show here. I just wrote a book called Why Smart People Make Bad Food Choices, which is something I just think is so incredibly important. And for me, the question was, well, why is it at a time when we have access to more information than we've ever had in the history of the world, and yet 42% of Americans are obese and 75% are overweight or obese? And yet you go to the grocery store and you actually have access to more healthy food options than we've ever had before. So it's like more information and more healthy options, and yet somehow we're not healthier. And so that was sort of the impetus for the book. Was I went back and tried to understand, how did we get to this point and what would it take to get back to a place where, we just didn't have to think so hard about healthy eating.
I love that. And I love taking out the guesswork because I've never researched this, but it seems to me that a lot of it comes from simplicity, is in like, okay, it's already made for me, I can eat that, or it's cheap, so I can eat that. Although fresh food is inexpensive. So I don't know. What have you discovered?
So I found that in many ways, it comes down to psychology in our environment. It's sort of like how our brains and our food environment are driving unhealthy choices. And so it's not so much about, our ability, willpower. I think a lot of people say, oh, if people just tried harder, or if they could follow this diet. And my feeling is, if you can't follow the diet, and if most people can't follow a diet, then it's not the diet, or it's not the person's fault, it's the diet's fault. And So what I did is I was looking back over time, and you think about 1960, and people were cooking with Crisco, like lard and all of these things, and yet somehow they still weren't fat. And so what you see is that a lot of it has to do with just our food environment. We snack all the time, we eat differently, we're not cooking our food, or we're not sitting down at a dinner table. So many little things have changed. It's not like there's a single solution. It's our entire food culture is completely different than it was, 40 or 50 years ago.
Would you say too that some of the food has actually changed?
Yeah, well, there have been a lot of changes. And what's interesting is that if you went back to like the late 1970s and 80s, that's when the dietary guidelines were just getting started. And the focus of the dietary guidelines was on reducing fat.
Mm-hmm.
And, that made sense, coronary heart disease and all these things. And what they did is they told consumers, eat less fat. And food companies did really what you would hope they would do. They started producing low fat versions of salad dressing and, all sorts of things. The problem is that psychology encountered marketing,
Mm-hmm.
and our brains thought, well, if one low fat cookie is good for me, the entire box must be great. And it gave us permission to overconsume.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, low fat is not low calorie in any way. And so many of the things that were sort of intended to reduce or improve our health actually unleashed our appetites.
That's a really good point too, because as somebody who's myself has had an addiction to things like cheese, for example, or ice cream, for example, it's like once I get going on it too, it's hard for me to stop. So if something says it's low fat or it's low sugar or it's low something, and it's got some sort of health claim, all of a sudden
Right.
I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I can have more.
Right. And that's the halo effect, and I talk about that in one chapter of the book, is that once a product has one good quality, we
Mhm.
just assume it has all good qualities. And that again gives us permission to eat more of it than we otherwise would.
I think that that's I've never heard that. Did you come up with that term, the halo effect?
No, alas, I didn't. But the health halo effect is alive and well in the food sector.
I love that idea. I've never heard it before, surprisingly. That is something fascinating, though, is that we do assume that just because it has one quality, that all of a sudden it's okay for us. So, for somebody that's maybe never really even looked at ingredients before, what are some things that maybe they should try and take a look at?
So I'm actually less focused on the individual ingredients. That I tell people, you should really be able to eat more or less what you want, as long
Hmm.
as you're eating it in, the proper balance. Like in
Mm.
back in the 60s, nobody was thinking about how many calories to eat and how many vegetables, it's just somehow our diets delivered healthier outcomes than they do
Hmm.
today. And it wasn't intentional. It was just, a factor of our environment. And I like to point out that people today don't even know what an adult serving of food looks like. And let me just paint a picture. If it was 1955 and we went to McDonald's, we would be eating a hamburger that was actually a little smaller than the hamburger that comes in a kid's meal.
Hmm.
Our French fry would be smaller than a small fry, because the small fry in a kid's meal today, that's a large fry from 1972. And
Wow.
the soda would have been 6 or 7 ounces. So 50% less than a kid's drink. And
Wow.
that was an adult serving. And so, most of us would look at that and say, well, where's the rest of my food? And, if you're eating 30, 40, 50% more food than you actually need, how can it be, surprising? So it's like, I don't focus on the ingredients,
Hmm.
I'm just saying, well, how do we feel good again about
Hmm.
eating the right sized portions of food?
I like too that you don't necessarily want to look at ingredients or count calories, because for somebody like myself who's had issues with food in the past, I get too obsessive over that.
Yeah.
It's got to be simple. And to me, instead of like breaking it down into macronutrients and micronutrients and proteins and all this, what happened to food?
Absolutely. Well, and I think that's actually a big part of the problem, is that the current approach to food has us thinking about food 24/7.
Yeah.
And it has a stressing about food. Well, when people are stressed, they eat. And when
Hmm.
you're stressed about food, you eat because you're thinking about food and because you're stressed. And so the current approach is almost, setting us up for failure
Yeah.
instead of helping us to think about, it just shouldn't be that complicated to eat a healthy diet. Now, obviously, some people do need to be very careful about, the kinds of food they eat and
Mhm.
restricted diets and all those things. But for the vast majority of us, I think we're overthinking it.
I love that. That makes it so much more simple. Now, that being said, how do we stop overthinking it? I mean, how do we get back to what we should, I'm using Nixon air quotes here, should be eating? How do
Right.
we even know because of so much information out there?
Yeah, so some of it's, over the last year, I think people have probably started eating more as a family.
Mm.
And I think that's a
Mhm.
good habit. Some people who really never learned how to cook have been forced to try their hand at cooking. And I think that's good. Obviously, many people are just overworked and very busy. And,
Mhm.
it's not to blame them for not having the time to cook. It's a luxury to be able to do it. But the more we're able to do that, sit down with our family, spend time preparing meals, and then thinking about how to teach the next generation. Because,
Mm.
of course, more and more children are obese as well. And it's, the trends are very much in the wrong direction. And so, things like vegetables. Well, if you are giving your kids vegetables and saying, you can have dessert if you finish your vegetables, what you're really teaching the kids is vegetables must not be very good or you wouldn't have to bribe me, right? Instead of like watching us as parents, eating our vegetables first. And, it's like, oh, they must really like that and fighting over the last piece of broccoli. And, how do we sort of convey that, it's good? And part of that is learning how to make vegetables taste really good. You know, if
Mhm.
if they were frozen and you steamed them and they're kind of soggy and not great, don't be surprised if the kids don't like them. But if you're able to bake them and they just taste amazing with some spices, then you're not going to have to force them to do something that actually they enjoy.
I love that idea too because it does matter how it's prepared. If it is
Yeah.
mushy and I mean, I don't want to eat mushy broccoli or whatever the case may be. To me, that's just not appealing. So why would I expect my child to want to eat that too?
Right. Well, it wasn't until my wife created sort of the baked Brussels sprouts that I realized I actually like Brussels sprouts. It's like for 40 years of my life, I just thought that I didn't like them, and it turns out I just didn't like how they were prepared.
That's a really good point. And it's kind of fun too, especially if you've never really had vegetables in your diet, to start experimenting. Okay, well, maybe I didn't like that. Let's try it a different way. Just because you tried cooking it that one way, that one time, doesn't necessarily mean that you have to write it
Right.
off if you don't like it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a challenge. It's like, well, how can I like
Mhm.
cauliflower? And let's bake it, let's stir fry it, let's add Indian spices, let's add Italian seasonings. Just what thing do you like? And let's and I think that comfort with food is also just important because
Mhm.
once you get comfortable and you're willing to experiment a little bit, even if it doesn't taste great, I mean, you actually have fun along the process, and that just makes it more enjoyable.
Well, the thing that I've noticed with cooking is that it makes me more in tune with my body and it makes me
Mhm.
more in tune with what I'm, actually putting into it. So,
Right.
and having an appreciation for the food that I'm creating for myself. But for somebody who maybe doesn't, why is it important to make, why is it important to cook for yourself or for your family?
Yeah, well, a lot of it has to do with just our pace of life. And, too often people are eating their food over the sink and just, knocking it back, in 5 or 6 minutes. And the problem is that if you don't take the time to understand sort of your own body,
Mhm.
then you don't really know when you're full or when you've had too much.
Mm.
There are a lot of experiments that show that if you're watching TV while you're eating, you're likely to eat more than you would if you had just sat down at the dinner table.
Mhm.
And so by thinking about what things do you do, and what habits do you have that are perhaps contributing to eating more than you probably know you should? What habits can we adopt that just make it easier? If we're sitting down
Mhm.
with a family, we're going to take more time, and we're going to be paying attention. We're going to be more mindful of what we're eating and how much we're eating and things like that.
And then there's that connection aspect of it too.
Mm.
So it's not just food anymore, it's an experience. So that's the one thing I noticed. I
Right.
lived in Italy and they eat supposedly bad food, but there's not really fat people there. So
Right. Yeah, and it's culture, and it's also the entire environment
Mhm.
that we live in, and relationships. When you're
Mhm.
happy, you tend to eat a better, make better choices about your food. Uh, when you have other people around, how you eat is different than maybe when you're eating alone. And so you want better quality food when there are other people. And, we're willing
Mhm.
to eat junk when we're alone because, you don't enjoy the experience of having this amazing meal that you've prepared just for yourself. That's tough.
That's very true. I've always
Hmm.
talked about that and how, it's like I'm willing to do all this stuff for, say, my pets, for example, yet I won't do the bare minimum for myself. But yet
Right.
my dog and my cat, they've got gourmet everything. It's funny how we do that. Yeah, it's kind of strange. So for somebody who maybe doesn't have the time to start cooking, what are some other habits they can adopt that might help?
Sure. And, a lot of this starts in the grocery store. And, one of the chapters of my book is about something called decision fatigue, which
Oh,
is like mental fatigue is the broader category, and
yeah.
decision
Mhm.
fatigue is a subset where, when we're tired, we just don't make as good of decisions. I'm sure we're
Mhm.
all familiar with that. And there's no place where you have to make more decisions than in a grocery store. And we tend to go to the grocery store at the end of a long day anyway. So we're already tired. And then you're, presented with just so many choices. A grocery store today has literally tens of thousands more products than a grocery store in 1980.
Yeah.
So, one, we have busier lives, but two, we just have so many more choices to make. And if you're on a fixed food budget, then it's
Mhm.
even harder because it's not just picking the things you want, it's picking the things and weighing the cost and making sure that it's the right choice for your family. And so whatever you can do to make that easier. And so if you can find a time to shop when you're not tired,
Mhm.
that's great. If making a list is good for many of us, because by the time we're finished at the shopping, we're tired, and we may take a candy bar, we may get some desserts just because we feel like we deserve a reward for having just suffered through that. And
Mhm.
lists can help us to stick to what we know we're supposed to get. um, but then you get back to the house, and if the snacks are sitting out on the countertop, well, every time you walk past and you don't grab the snack, that's
Mhm.
just a little bit of mental energy, because it's like, okay, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. Well, eventually you do it. And
Mhm.
so if you don't buy a snack, it's pretty much impossible to eat it. If you do buy it, put it in the cupboard or someplace where it's not calling to you all the time. And if it is on the countertop, we'll put it into a jar, so
Mhm.
they're just these little things that make it slightly more difficult to, make the bad choice, and slightly easier to make the good choice. And so we can begin to like reshape our environment, and, create a habit of eating, at the dinner table, or create a habit of eating at a specific time.
Mhm.
So there are little nudges you can do to make it just easier to do what you want to do.
Well, I think too, when I hear you say that, it makes me think that's one less decision I have to make
Right.
because that's when dinner is. So it's not when are we going to eat, that kind of thing, or this is how it is. So it's not one less thing to think about. So I love
Yeah.
that idea. That's
Well,
yeah.
and if you have a busy week, then some people can do the food prep on a Sunday.
Mhm.
So if you've got a couple of heads of broccoli, go ahead and chop it up, put it into a baggie or a bowl, and then each day you have whatever you want to serve, ready to go, instead of
Mhm.
rushing and spending 45 minutes to an hour. Not everybody has that amount of time every evening to prepare a meal. And also when you're tired, it's hard to think about, well, what's the recipe I want to get? So if you can do some of that planning in advance, it'll also save a lot of time.
Yeah, when you're not tired.
Right.
I like that. You know what worked for me too, because I used to go and have the best intentions, and I would go to the grocery store and I'd buy all this food and I'd plan to food prep and I'd get tired. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't eat any of the food I bought the entire week, end up throwing everything out. And I
Yeah.
discovered what worked. First of all, I felt bad because wasting food and it's really bad for the environment. But I discovered that if I go shop on, say, Saturday and food prep on Sunday, then I
Right.
don't mind doing it. All of a sudden, I was able to do it.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Getting into those habits is just really important.
Yeah, it is. I love that. Just sort of taking out any of those little thoughts, kind of like Steve Jobs and how he used to always wear the same thing every single day because it was one less thing I had to think about.
Right. Yeah. And my goal is, for people that when they're thinking about food, they're thinking about joy and happiness.
Yes.
They're not stressing about it. It's not making their life, less enjoyable.
So, what are your thoughts on like celebrations and things like that? It seems to me like you'd say, don't worry about the birthday cake.
Yeah, certainly, eating the cake is fine. And the problem is when, we eat two pieces or we eat,
Mhm.
a lot of unfortunately a lot of, cakes these days, it's like they've gotten thicker and thicker and, a slice is, like a pound and a half instead
Yeah.
of, a smaller piece. And again, it's kind of listening to your body.
Mhm.
And one of the examples I give is, if you've been on an airplane and you got those little like 6 or 7 ounce Coke cans, how many times have you finished that can on the airplane and thought, wow, I wish I had 6 more of those? And yet, that's how much some of the, bottles of soda, if you were getting a 1 liter bottle to drink by yourself. And so I think we forget that like when we have that small can, every sip is like really enjoyable. I mean, it's
Mhm.
like it somehow seems like it must be a different product than the one you get in the big bottle because you actually enjoy it so much more. And part of the reason is that by the time you finish it, you're still at like this high peak of enjoyment. But
Mm.
after, 20 ounces of something, you're just drinking it to finish it,
Mhm.
and so you haven't actually enjoyed the experience as much. And that's part of why when you're right sizing your portions, you're actually maximizing your enjoyment of that meal. So it's not about denying yourself, it's about
Mhm.
enhancing the experience.
So, what would be a portion then for, say, vegetables or meat or whatever the case may be?
Well, when it comes to the vegetables, you could probably eat about as much as you want, So most of us are not like overdoing it with, the broccoli and the carrots and the other things. What I would say is a dinner plate, the average dinner plate today is like 11 or 12 inches, which is
Mhm.
pretty big. In 1960, the average dinner plate was 7 to 9 inches,
Oh,
which
wow.
is kind of what most of us think of as a salad plate.
Mhm.
And so the problem is that when we're trying to figure out how much food is appropriate, we don't really think of it in terms of like this is how many ounces that we have to put on our plate. We actually just look at the plate and think about, can I eat that? And
Mhm.
and it's like if it's this much food, we think we can eat it. The problem is if the plate is bigger, then we think we can eat that much. And if it's bigger,
Uh-huh.
and so I tell this story. I went to the Cheesecake Factory for Father's Day a few years ago, and I wanted to teach my kids about big portion sizes, and
Mhm.
they're known for it. And so I ordered the steak and mashed potatoes and green beans, and it came. And I have to say, I was a little disappointed because I was expecting like so much food that it would be clearly, inconceivable that I could eat
Mhm.
it. And I'm thinking, wow, I can totally polish that off. Unlike the average person, I reached into my wife's purse and I pulled out a 9 inch plate and I replated the food. You can imagine how amused my kids were to watch me do this. And I realized that it was actually 2 full meals, that the amount of food completely filled that 9 inch plate. And so then I took out a tape measure because I had to measure this original plate, and it was 15 inches wide and 12 inches deep. So it
Wow.
was just so big that 2 adult servings of food looked like a reasonable amount for me to eat. And I'm somebody who's like constantly on guard against
Mm-hmm.
that. And my brain was completely fooled by the size of the plate into thinking how much I could eat.
That's absolutely fascinating to me. So for somebody that say doesn't have time to cook, maybe that's what they should do is they're going to
Right.
order food in is replate it.
Absolutely. I mean, it's actually a really reasonable thing to do. And, even if you're eating, a Weight Watchers meal or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a huge amount of value in just replating that food. I
Yeah.
know it creates more work in terms of cleaning it, but when you replate it, I think you're just going to enjoy it more
Yes.
because, in that carton,
Yeah.
you're just eating it and not really enjoying it. And then you're finished in like 3 minutes. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
if it's on a plate, you actually take a little more time, you enjoy the experience. It'll look so much nicer. And it's just a different experience.
Oh, I love that so much. And I agree with you 100%. That's part of the reason I love going to restaurants. It's the presentation of the food.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I remember when I was in college, a friend of mine, we went to this restaurant and he just loved the ice cream there. It was just, it was the thing he had to have at the end of every meal. And one day we were sort of sitting in a place where we could see them getting it out of the freezer and we realized it's exactly the same ice cream we eat at home. And it was just this regular generic store brand. But it was, in that environment, we just experienced it differently.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually have a chapter in my book about how physiologically we can experience things differently based on our expectations. It's the
Ooh.
title of the chapters. The best title for a research article I ever read is "Mind Over Milkshakes." And this professor did this fascinating project where we already know that like if you think something's low fat and then somebody asks you to rate it, you actually rate it lower, even if it's
Oh.
not low fat, or low sugar. It's like the expectation that it's going to be low calorie makes us enjoy it less. And
Huh.
so she did this experiment where she gave people a milkshake and it was either a low fat milkshake or an indulgent milkshake, even though it was the same one. And not only did people report not enjoying the low fat as much as they did this indulgent shake, when she looked at sort of the body chemistry when we began to digest, our
Mm-hmm.
body responded as if we got the milkshake we expected.
Oh,
In
wow.
other words, the people were hungrier faster if they ate a low fat, and they actually felt more full, and their body chemistry actually responded as if they had gotten a bigger meal. And
Wow.
so, our brains are, sometimes working against us, so and that's one of the dangers of, eating what might be a low fat meal or a low
Mm-hmm.
calorie meal is that our brain doesn't expect us to be as full. It's like even though the number of calories may be perfectly sufficient, we
Yeah.
still may not feel full 2 hours later because we know that we ate a low calorie meal.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's so true. Oh my goodness, I love that. We do have to go to a commercial break, so we'll be back in just a minute. Okay, Jack?
Thank you. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, this is so much fun. But we do have to go to commercial. But before we go, I'm going to say hello to everybody who is watching us live. You're very much appreciated. And we'll be right back after these messages.
Now, you can vibrationally align your aura. You can gain a larger and spiritual perspective on life, relationships, God, people, wellness, and money. You can also have moments of meditation and reflection any time of the day. And reading the thrilling, adventurous, and mystical story of Shiga will just add more faith to your daily experience of the mystery of the universe.
When drug or alcohol addiction take over, things begin to disappear. Your friends, your family, and eventually, you. Recommended by Dr. Phil, New Method Wellness can help get your life back with individualized treatment plans for dual diagnosis clients. New Method Wellness provides the most highly credentialed treatment in a safe and welcome environment. Call New Method Wellness for your free consultation and ask about our national accreditations. Together, we can put the pieces back together.
As human beings, we are meant to thrive in an environment where true love is shared, where we are welcome just as we are. A space we connect with others with the single purpose to find God as love within. A place we learn to raise our consciousness and vibration for happiness, wellness, and wealth creation. Transformative, an online spiritual gathering for everyone. This invitation is sent to you by www.livingfaithschool.org.
Welcome back, everyone. My name is Julianne Meyer, and I am the host of Own Your Wellness. And today's special guest is Jack Bobo. Let's bring him back. Hello, sir. Welcome back.
Hi.
So as we were having those commercials, I was thinking about something that happened to me. And this was a zillion years ago, so at least 30 years ago. And I was at the movies, and I had ordered a Mountain Dew as my soda. And they said, we're out. And so I got a cherry Coke instead. So the whole time I'm drinking my cherry Coke in the theater, I'm thinking it's regular Coke because it tastes so funny to me. And I get out and I look at my soda, and it was actually a Mountain Dew. And the entire time I thought it was a regular Coke. Because my brain just knew it wasn't Mountain Dew.
Right. Yeah. And there's some experiments where they did exactly that. They'd give people chocolate and tell them it was raspberry or something like that. And most people just didn't notice the difference. Yeah.
It's fascinating how powerful our mind is. So there's got to be different ways, or can we build habits that influence our mind?
Yeah, absolutely. So much of what we do is out of habit. The Daniel Kahneman, who won the Nobel Prize for Economics, is a psychologist, and he wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. And in the book, he talks about how we have this fast thinking part of our brain, which sort of gets us through the day and makes all those quick snap decisions that we have to do. And then we have that slow thinking part, which is sort of doing the math and the heavy lifting and making tough decisions. Mm-hmm. But that slow thinking part doesn't do anything unless it knows it has to. It's like when you're going through the grocery store aisle and you're making those decisions, that's just that fast habit. Mm-hmm. And so what you really need to do, though, is to figure out some of the things you think are better choices for you. And then if you can ingrain those as habit, then you'll start to make good choices out of habit just as much as you've made bad choices in the past. Mm-hmm. And so one of the habits that, my family have, I have 2 children, and when my wife and I would go out to eat with them, we would order 3 meals for the 4 of us. And, and of course, I was the one who never ordered a meal. But I can't think, and we've been doing this for like 5 years, and I can't think of a single time when we went out to dinner where we wish we had ordered an additional meal.
Mm-hmm.
And we would often, then get dessert afterwards as well. And we'd still have food to take home.
Wow.
And so that was just a habit that we had. And, it saves money, but it's really about sort of right sizing your meals. For other people, and I talked about Cheesecake Factory earlier. It's not to condemn them. I mean, people come back for the big, portions. But if you eat 2 meals for the price of one, that's not really good value. Now, if you get 2 meals for the price of one, that's great value. And so what we really need to do is, instead of sort of waiting until you get to the end of the meal and sort of leaving half the food if you didn't eat it all, what's really better is, as soon as they serve it to you, to say, hey, can I get my to-go box now? And then you actually, put it away before you take your first bite. And this gets back to the psychology. If you leave half the food on your plate, your brain thinks he didn't finish eating.
Yeah.
And so 2 hours later, you're going to be hungry.
Yeah.
But if you have already put the food away and you clean your plate, then your brain's thinking, time to kick in and start burning some calories. And so, you can actually, again, trick your brain into doing what it's supposed to do through the behaviors that you adopt. And, if we do it enough, they become habits.
I love that. And it's kind of fascinating, because even the other night I had a salad for dinner, and my first thought was, well, if this doesn't fill me up, I can always have a snack later.
Right.
But I know that it was enough for me with my, calorically, and I mean, as far as nutrition, because that's the other thing too that people don't really think about. You might be eating a lot of food, but is it actually nourishing you, or is it just filling you up?
Yeah, and that's where more whole foods in our diet is a good thing. A lot of processed foods. It's not that they're necessarily bad for you, but processed foods are often easier to eat.
Yeah.
And therefore, you don't stop at, whatever a number of calories is the right amount. You just eat a little bit more because it's so easy to eat.
Yeah.
And, they're hyper palatable. And so, that's part of the challenge, is that, again, when we were growing up, a bag of potato chips, was one size, and today it's probably twice as big.
Yeah.
And again, consumers, we can eat about 20% more or less than sort of the normal appropriate serving size without actually knowing it. And so if you can get into habits of eating slightly fewer calories than the standard amount you need, over time, you could lose 1 or 2 or 3 pounds, a year after year. And, 20 years from now, you could be 20 pounds or 30 pounds lighter, and you wouldn't be able to point to anything you did differently.
Yeah.
And that's sort of my goal is, how do we tweak our habits in a way that simply helps us, a few calories a day, but every day for the rest of our lives.
That's a beautiful thing, because most people think they have to do this huge overhaul and then get discouraged when all of a sudden they can't change absolutely everything about the way that they eat all in one go, and go from, McDonald's to raw kale, for example.
Right. Yeah. And that's, where our physiology is pushing back as well. We reach a set point where, our body kind of feels like, okay, this is normal. And then if you start restricting your calories too much, then, you're just hungry all the time.
Yeah.
But if you were tricking yourself and eating a few calories, your body wouldn't know it. So it wouldn't respond as if you were, constraining your calories. It's not that, intermittent fasting or other things don't work for some people sometimes, but they don't work for everybody all the time. And so we need to find strategies that, consistently work for people.
Well, something that I found fascinating too is when I have fasted in the past for whatever reason, spiritual or for physical reasons. The thing that I've discovered is that if I can get past, and I do eventually get past that, I think I want to eat my arm because I'm so hungry. If I can get past that, then it's fascinating how much little I actually need to eat.
Right.
And, in comparison, because it's like I've reset my body and all of a sudden I don't need tons of food. I can get full off of what would be a normal portion.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
But I'm not saying that's for everybody. I'm just saying that has been my experience to actually have that happen. Now, have you noticed too that, if somebody wants to say, start going towards more whole foods and maybe less fast food and things like that, that their taste buds actually change?
Yeah, well, I think, people's expectation of, how much salt or seasoning or other things in food, is very malleable. And, so over time, if you reduce the amount of sodium, then, you just come to not expect as much of it. And, some of the food companies, Campbell's Soup, one of the things they did is they experimented with different soup recipes to reduce the sodium. And when they put low sodium on the can, unfortunately, people said it didn't taste good. And so then they just took the label off the can, but they kept the sodium out of the can, and people were just fine with it. So, that's sort of stealth health where the companies are doing things to actually help us be a little healthier, but they can't tell us, because as soon as they tell us, we don't think we'd like it.
That's fascinating, because I've never thought of companies as actually trying to help us with our own health. I've always thought of them as like, here's more, here's the taste point for salt and sugar, and there you go, have more. I love that.
Yeah. And, there's been some fair success with, programs like that. And in the UK, I talk about in the book how the grocery stores sort of all got together and started redesigning the layout of the grocery store to try to promote more purchases of fruits and vegetables. And they were able to increase by 10 or 15% over the course of a year purchases of fruits and vegetables just by redesigning the layout, so that people were a little bit more likely to buy the fruits and vegetables. And, I'm sure that not a single customer sort of walked through the store and thought, hey, they're trying to force me to eat more vegetables. It just happened.
Yeah. Organically.
Exactly.
So you've written a book. I'd love for you can get it on Amazon, correct?
Yeah, you can get it Amazon, Barnes and Noble, wherever people buy books.
And what was the name of it again?
Why Smart People Make Bad Food Choices.
Why Smart People Make Bad Food Choices. I need to read that. Actually, that's one of the reasons I wanted you on the show, is because of your book. I was like, oh my gosh, this guy is going to be amazing.
I'll get you a copy.
Oh, wow. Thank you. I love that. Thank you. So, and then if people wanted to reach out to you, you have a website as well, correct?
I do. It's www.futurityfood.com. That's Futurity, Futurity. It sounds like a made up word, but it's not. But it's still hard to pronounce.
Well, it kind of is, but not really. You said www.futurity.com?
Futurityfood.com.
Food.com. Okay, let me. Oops, I put it up. I was trying to change it. Anyway, so there we go. I want to make sure we pop that up. So, and you have a TED Talk too, correct?
I do. Yeah. It's, also available online. You could just search for, TED Talk and Jack. Yeah. And Jack.
Awesome. Bobo. I love it. And so that's your website. That's how people can find out more about you. I know you've got blog posts there and all kinds of fun stuff. Your website's very fun, by the way.
Oh, great. I'm glad to hear that.
And obviously Amazon and Barnes and Noble to get that book. So what kind of stuff, I mean, you've mentioned some things that are in the book, but would you mind telling a little bit more of what to expect?
Yeah. So if they first look at the blog post, sort of the 10 blog posts on my website sort of make up the first third of the book, which is sort of about consumer psychology and helping us to understand how our brain sometimes leads us astray. And then the next third of the book is about how our food environment influences the decisions, so that we can be more aware of that. And it also talks about sort of the history of how we got where we are. And then the last part of the book is really about, well, how do we as society begin to reshape our food environment to deliver those healthy outcomes? how do we work with the grocery stores and the restaurants and, governments and others to help us to make the decisions we want. So it's not about forcing people. It's not about telling people what they should and shouldn't do. It's really about making the decisions we want to make easier for us.
I love that. And, a lot of decisions are made for us, whether we realize it or not. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And so it builds on something called nudge theory. There's a book by Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein called Nudge. And it uses those ideas of like, how do you create defaults? And so anybody who's gone to, started a new company, maybe you're in a 401k. And so it's like, you can opt out if you want, but the default is to be part of the plan. Well, if the default is to be part, 90% of people stay. But if you actually have to then opt into the plan, most people don't do that. They're like, I'm not sure if I want to. And so they put off the decision.
Yeah.
And so just by whichever option is the default strongly influences whether or not we do it. And so if you go through the cafeteria and the fruit and vegetables are first, that has a different impact than if the desserts are first, things like that.
That's very true. I never really thought about it like that, but I know for me, it was a decision for me to opt into my 401k. Like, do I want to do this?
Yeah. And it's an important choice. And, for many people, it's too important to make a decision right there.
Exactly.
And that's the worst choice, right?
Yeah. And that's the thing too, is like, you think that you can think about it. And then 10 years later, all of a sudden you're still eating those huge portions or.
Right.
Yeah, I love that. Are there any other tips or tricks that maybe people could try to make habits?
Yeah, so I would say, sort of look in your kitchen and look at your shopping habits and, think about sort of where are the things that you feel like you're not doing right. Is it with snacking? Is it with not eating the healthy food, or as many fruits and vegetables? And then sort of attack it from that perspective. If you're not eating enough vegetables, it's like, well, would I eat more if I loved it? Would I eat more if it wasn't so much work? So sort of understanding the pain points in your own health journey allows you to attack it, not in a sort of it's a challenge way, but, hopefully people will then be happier because they've been able to address some of those factors.
Well, I love the idea of asking better questions, and because if you ask a different question, then you get a different answer. So if you ask yourself something else, like what can I do, or break it down, then all of a sudden it's not so daunting. I like that.
Yeah. Well, and which restaurants or grocery stores or others are working for me, and which ones, tend to lead me to the unhealthy choice. And if I go there, is there a way for me to sort of make my outcome a little bit better, taking a half portion or splitting a portion or doing other things that allow you to have dessert and really enjoy the meal more than you would if you had to deny yourself dessert.
Yeah, exactly. That's true. There's certain stores that I just don't go to. I end up spending a little bit more money, but my health is worth more money and I enjoy my food more. So it's sometimes you got to work with what and I don't like to use the word limitations, but under your own parameters, I guess, one
know
size
thyself, right?
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Oh, that's fascinating. Is it, I hope I don't murder his last name, but Michael Pollan?
Yeah, Michael Pollan.
Pollan. I knew it. I knew I was going to do that. His book, Food Rules. I love in there how it says you can have as much junk food as you want as long as you make it yourself. That'll slow anybody down.
Yeah, and he has a lot of good suggestions in that book, and a lot of it. It's not about demonizing the foods we love and enjoy. It's about being able to enjoy them and not feel bad about it.
Well, that's the thing too, is if you're not going to enjoy the dessert because you're feeling guilty, because you'll feel shame, then you are having all of these stress hormones in your body. And of course, that creates cortisol. You're literally making your body fat by having these thoughts about the dessert that you chose to eat.
Right. we're making ourselves sick. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Or just, I mean, it should be fun.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm all about making dessert fun, even dinner fun, whatever. Yeah, I love that. For somebody that maybe, is new to, because I know that there's certain ideas like walk around the outside of the grocery store first before you go in the aisles, things like that. Do you have any suggestions for somebody who wants to maybe navigate the grocery store differently?
Yeah, I mean, having a list is the number one. If you walk in with a list and you buy the things on the list, then you're going to be just fine. Uh, I think it's a little bit harder, when you start saying just, go around the perimeter and other things, because, eventually you need something in the middle aisles. And that feels like limiting yourself. Whereas, when you make the list, it's a very conscious decision. This is what I want, and this is what I'm getting. It's not about limiting yourself. It's about, making a smart choice.
I love that. So, we talked a little bit about how, we eat food when we're stressed, and we kind of, stress eating, or, all that kind of thing. I'm just wondering, what do you do to help eliminate stress?
Well, I do find cooking to be a way of relieving stress, chopping up vegetables, seasoning, putting it in the oven, baking, it takes a certain amount of time to do it. But, the smells and everything, they lift you up and they heighten the experience, and it just makes it that much more enjoyable. Uh, but I think, for many of us, relationships are good for our health, and they also lead to a healthier lifestyle. Having strong relationships, having a job that we feel is meaningful, again, leads to, a better, healthier life. And, finding things that allow us to move, is it taking the stairs instead of the elevator, walking to the store if that's reasonable, instead of, or biking and things like that. Just creating habits that aren't, it's not about working out, or, you don't have to put in an hour of exercise every day to be able to just do a little bit more tomorrow than you did today.
Yeah, I think a lot of people underestimate movement in general.
Yeah.
You could work out an hour a day, but if you don't move the rest of the day, it really doesn't matter that you worked out for an hour. You need to be, some movement.
Yeah, well, and there are studies that show that, people who sort of work out hard will compensate in how much they eat in the calories. And so, it's really about resetting the baseline. It's not about just, doing something really hard, that's like dieting and expecting it to stick.
Exactly. We are almost out of time. It's almost been an hour. Can you believe it? Do you have any last thoughts or feelings or anything that you want to reiterate with the audience?
Yeah, I would remind people that, we have so many diets and diet books and things out there, and yet 42% of Americans are obese, 75% are overweight or obese. It'll be 50% by 2030 if we don't do something about it. It's not your fault. If the diets worked, then you would be fine. So, so it's really just understanding that it's not a lack of willpower. It's the failure of the diets. It's not the failure of the individual. And that by finding habits that are easier to integrate into our life, then it should be easier to achieve these outcomes. We shouldn't have to worry so much about it.
I love that so much. It really, yeah. If it was, if the diet really worked, then one would work for everybody, first of all. And then, it's just, there's so much more to it than information out there. I love that.
Yeah.
I just love that. It's habits. It really does come down to habits. And then people, one more time, they can get your book on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. They can get it. Are there any other major book stores out there left? I don't know.
I think there's bookstore.com as well. But really, wherever people buy books, if you can go get it from your local bookstore, please do that and give them your business too.
I love that. And to reach out to you, that's the website. Well, I just want to say thank you, Jack, for being on the show today. It has been an absolute pleasure to pick your brain and discover more about what we can do on a daily basis to change our habits in order to be healthier and make those better food choices.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Have a great night.
You too.
Well, that is all the time that we have for tonight. And until next time, Thursday it is. We'll see you soon, everyone. Enjoy your week.